Did Iowa find an offense? Well, I think the jury's still out. We definitely know that Iowa did not lose its defense. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Hawkeyes Live. It's good to be in season. A victory under the belt for the black and gold, of course, disposing of Illinois State in shutout fashion, 40-0 as the offense got rolling in the second half. Bring those comments and questions. We appreciate your support in any such way. Please hit the like button, subscribe here at the Voice of College Football, and the Super Chat contribution is available. Corey Brad is here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. We will give a brief summary of last week's game and get Levi Stevenson in here. It's our
Iowa's
annual,
favorite,
yes.
Iowa fans' favorite contributor.
Love it. Love when you two get together. It's Cyhawk, and it should be mighty interesting and also important to both teams' futures, as both have high expectations, and rightfully so. Corey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I took a shot at you earlier on your live show on the main channel so that we could focus on Iowa here. You and I disagreed on something in regards to USC and some conclusions I think that you drew from it that I was hesitant to draw. And but the bottom line is, hey, this is great debate. We're actually debating football that has happened now, or 2 weeks, really just 1 weekend. Florida State's got 2 losses already. Paul Feinbaum is saying that they're done. I love how, can I just make a statement?
How astute of him.
I just think it's like, I get it. It's the way the national media works, but whether it's Feinbaum or Stephen A. Smith or Skip Bayless, those guys make a living on making like conclusive statements that are irrational and illogical, but people love them. It's just amazing. Like, I think you and I could do that job. I do. I mean,
we might be a little bit too rational.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you could just, if you can think in those terms, great. But bottom line is, hey, the Cyhawk game always creeps up on you because you're waiting and waiting and waiting for the first game, and then you play that first game, and you're all of a sudden in Cyhawk week. I wish it was in November. Maybe sometime down the line we'll get this game during Rivalry week, but I'd love to see it in the snow. But it'll be fun. This should be good weather this weekend. Maybe some wind that the Kickers have to deal with, but other than that, it's going to be raucous. Kinnick Stadium's going to be rocking. It's going to be a lot better game than it was 2 years ago. I think some Cyclone fans, including Levi, might say that game was all right the way it ended, but I think quality of the two teams will be better, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is an Iowa team that could vie for a Big Ten championship and certainly a college football playoff appearance. And Iowa State is believing the same thing, although their path is probably to, of course, win the Big 12. Levi Stevenson standing by, wide right, natty light. And here we are. We check in with Levi during the offseason, then, of course, have to bring him in the week of the Cyhawk game. And Levi, you got to be pumped for this one. I think people beyond Iowa are pumped for this one. Corey asked me earlier today where this stood on my list of national games, and I think it's right up there. Might even be better than Texas, Michigan, although those are the brand names that people are focusing on. Yeah. I think this might be the second most attractive game of the week going into it, and it's mighty important.
Attractive, doing a lot of heavy lifting there, but
attractive to the football purists.
Yeah, it's attractive to the football diehards, I guess. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. I mean, Texas, Michigan is probably going to get 10 million viewers, I'd bet. But I would argue that Cyhawk is probably the second most interesting for us for sure. But even to the average college football fan, I think Cyhawk is probably the second most interesting game of the weekend, I would say, for sure.
And there's not a lot of great matchups nationally.
There's really not. It's actually kind of a bummer weekend, but
there are some intriguing matchups. Tennessee, North Carolina State. Who does Kansas play, Mark?
Illinois. Kansas boat raced them last year, so it's, I don't know.
Well, yeah, but see, like those are for me as an Iowa fan and Iowa guy, I'm interested to see that.
Anytime you get like a Big 12, Big 10 matchup or two power conferences matching up, even if they're not power brands, anytime you get two power conferences matching up, it's interesting. And I think Arizona State plays Mississippi State this week, so that could be an interesting one since Arizona State looked competent maybe last week. We'll see, but they looked a lot better than people thought they would. And so now they play an SEC team. So we'll see. I mean, it's not an elite SEC team, but it is an SEC team.
I'll tell you what, I think there's a great opportunity at some late night watching after I'm done with the post-game show with Don. Mark, there's so many Saturdays, especially when you have these 2:30 games, that I don't get to watch any other football because you have a 2:30 game and basically you're on the post-game show until 9. But at 9 o'clock Central Time, it's Oregon and Boise. And after how Oregon finished or played against Idaho the other day, that's an intriguing one for me. Boise scored a lot of points over the weekend. They also gave up a lot of points to, I think was it Georgia State or Georgia Southern? One of those two teams.
Yeah,
but
something like that. Yeah.
I think they scored over 100. So
State.
I think it was Georgia State.
I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm intrigued by this game, Levi. I actually, and I don't normally do this. I went back and watched from start to finish Iowa State's game. I watched half of it yesterday, the other second half today.
I've watched a good chunk of Iowa's game. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it.
It's a very... I'm anxious to talk to you about that.
I would be curious what your thoughts are on it. Yeah,
on Iowa State
or on Iowa State's game. Yeah. Well, I mean, on both. Frankly, we're talking about the game on Saturday. So I mean,
I'll just say this. I guess let me give you my initial thoughts, and then Levi, you want to chime in on this.
Yeah,
so, I guess my first takeaway was, wow, what a start for Iowa State. You come out in 2 big pass plays down the field for a touchdown, scoring in 36, 37 seconds, 2 plays.
Like
on the length of the field, basically.
Right. Yep.
Pretty impressive there. And that's one thing heading into the year. I'm like, okay, that is going to be there's going to be so many matchups to watch, but that's the big one to me is Iowa. If they're susceptible anywhere, it's the corner spot opposite Jamari Harris. I thought TJ Hall looked really good on Saturday. He's been dealing with some injuries. He looked healthy Saturday. I think they like the depth there, but it's certainly not the quality that they have on the other side of the field and the experience of Jamari Harris. So can Jaden Higgins, you tell me who's going to be matched up with the second quarter? Is it going to be Jaden Higgins? Is it going to be Green? Is it going to be? It'll be
either Jalen Noel or Jaden Higgins. Which I mean, those are clearly the two. Those are the top two. Eli Green had a really nice showing last week, so I think they found in Eli Green they found wide receiver 3. I think they solidified wide receiver 3 last week with Eli Green. But I mean, no question about it. Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins.
But but the reason I led with the other two guys,
do Iowa's corners switch?
Well, Phil's done a little bit more of that in recent years. I think they'll do that.
I would guess they'll take which is there one that has is significantly taller than the other one?
Well, TJ's the longest. TJ Hall's the longest.
Okay, so you would probably put him on Higgins since Higgins is about 6'4". You'd probably put him on Higgins.
I would agree with that. just from a best corner versus best receiver too, because Jamari's their best receiver. I think he's going to go with Jalen Noel. I don't know if it's more of a height thing or just.
I think it's going to depend on the situation of the game because Jalen Noel. I mean, he can be a deep threat. Obviously, he can be a deep threat. He caught the first pass last game, but typically they like to use him in short and medium situations and then let Jaden Higgins be the deep threat. But they can interchange. So my guess is that it probably won't be this guy's on this guy, this guy's on this guy. I think you'll just see it. And frankly, Iowa may choose to not switch their corners and they may just keep them where they're at and do it.
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to say. I mean, at this point, you got to cover them both, and you have to give both of them equal attention, just because they're both very, very good receivers. You can't really favor one or the other. So I don't, I'm not sure exactly how Iowa will choose to defend them, but it will be interesting to see who they put on them.
Mark, can you scroll down real quick to the receiving numbers for Iowa State on Saturday? Because that was the first thing before I even watched the game. I looked at the box score and I'm like, okay, impressive stuff from everybody, frankly. And Eli Green's a kid that Iowa was interested in out of North Dakota State transfer portal.
He's basically a Jalen Noel clone, essentially. He's the same exact player.
So everybody's excited about what we saw from Iowa's receiving core, but it's got to be put in perspective. And Iowa State routinely has guys that put up over 100 yards receiving and that 8 for 135 and a touchdown. Now, I will say this. Let me go on with my takeaways from the game because I think that's going to be a storyline. How does Iowa's defensive backfield handle the wide receiver talent of Iowa State? But when I watched that game, and I know you know where I'm going to go with this, but North Dakota's ability to move the ball and stay on the field and convert third downs, that's got to be a concern for Iowa State fans. Now, they weren't getting huge chunks, but they had a drive of 13 minutes in that first half.
That's one we should talk about that drive because it changed a lot of things.
And several third down conversions in there as well.
Sure, absolutely.
They had a mobile quarterback. I think that's of note. They had a guy who could run, a guy who was very green. And by the way,
North Dakota did what you and I did in 2019 when Will McIlvain turned into Johnny Manziel out of nowhere. and North Dakota's quarterback kind of did something similar like that, which they had a new offensive coordinator and a brand new quarterback and their best wide receiver in school history, which they were feeding a lot.
They
So
did. Now I will say this:
it's a weird situation,
but North Dakota also ran the ball well. I
did.
mean, relatively well, and that's a very young.
Their yards per
offensive
carry
line.
wasn't great, but it was like they were effective when they needed to be.
Yeah, I think better than you would expect.
Sure.
I mean, this is. Let's just. I was honest about Illinois State. I'll be honest about North Dakota. Basically, Illinois State and North Dakota are basically the same team as it relates to where they're projected to finish.
Yeah, they're both kind of like a C tier FCS program where if you got
I wouldn't go that low.
Well, I guess if your top is S, then they're probably B. Like because you got your S tiers, which is South Dakota State and North Dakota State. Then you've got your A tiers with like the UNIs and the
but I'm just saying, like they are.
But yeah,
Missouri Valley Conference is without question the best FCS conference.
No question.
And both of those teams are picked to finish top half, and they're both, I think, preseason top 25 in the FCS.
Yeah, it's tough. FCS ranking is kind of tricky because both Illinois State and North Dakota State had massive roster turnover. So I think that both are probably fairly significantly overranked to begin the season.
I don't know that Illinois State had massive roster turnover, but
I think they turned over like some. I thought they turned over like 30 something players. And like North Dakota State
everybody's
was like
turning over 30 players, but
except for Iowa State and Iowa, I guess.
Illinois State did return their best running back, the first team all conference running back, first team all conference linebacker. Both those guys actually got hurt during the game on Saturday. Their big miss was Zach Anixtad, the transfer from Minnesota, who put up great numbers last year. So Illinois State was not very good at quarterback. They played two guys, one being what's his face, whose name escapes me, from Des Moines, or I think he's got connections to Des Moines, born in Des Moines or something. Anyways, Jake Rubley transferred.
Oh, okay.
That
name sounds familiar.
And so I guess my thing is, I think Iowa's got a shot, especially now. People don't know Iowa State linebacker Caleb Bacon got hurt, and I believe he's out. Am I correct, Levi?
Oh, he's definitely out for this game. It sounds like they think he can be back later in the season, but it's a long-term injury. Like he had surgery yesterday.
So I've been saying for a long time, Levi, because I got a lot of respect for Iowa State's DBs, specifically their safeties, for obvious reasons, the experience, the reputation there with Cooper and Verdon, and with Freeler. Freeler got a pick on Saturday on a horrendous throw, by the way, from North Dakota quarterback.
Yeah, he got hit. He got hit as he threw it.
Well, but it was a stupid decision.
It was a bad decision. It was kind of a duck, but a pick's a pick.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Iowa gets a lot of.
I say Iowa fans should know anything.
Yeah. So I guess here's what I would say. I've long thought that Iowa may have some problems with those Iowa State DBs, specifically the safeties. However, I saw a little bit of susceptibility, perhaps with a couple. Well, one of which is a young corner, right, for Iowa State. I can't remember his last name.
Jontez Williams.
He showed a little bit of susceptibility on a couple of occasions. I do wonder, with Caleb Bacon out, how much those safeties might have to cheat down, and perhaps that opens up something down the field for a guy like Vanderzee or a guy like Gill, because of the injury to Bacon specifically, in order to stop that Iowa run game. If Iowa can get that rhythm they had in the second half on the ground, then I think you're going to see that. And then it's a matter of can Cade McNamara get the job done like he did in the second half Saturday. I think that's where the game is won and lost. Now, I do feel pretty good overall. I will say this. I feel, as an Iowa guy, I feel pretty good about Iowa's chances Saturday, not just because it's at home, but, I mean, the defense didn't show much of a chink. Iowa State's going to test them vertically like Illinois State did not. But I just think, based on what we saw in the second half, and if that carries over, Iowa should be able to run the ball effectively, which is going to force John Haycock to play left-handed with those safeties, is my guess.
You covered a few different things that I think are worthy of expanding on here. So, as far as the Caleb Bacon injury thing, going into the season, linebacker was always the spot that everyone was looking at, like, okay, it's kind of thin there, or it's I don't know, thin, but it's young. It's really young at linebacker, and no question about it, losing Will McLaughlin and Caleb Bacon hurts. No doubt about it. Fortunately, we did see a couple guys play on Saturday, specifically Cooper Ebel, that I'm very excited about. He played well, and I think he's the next great Iowa State linebacker. I really do. I think he's AJ Klein micros level good, maybe better, or will be better. And then you've got Caleb Brazina. He's just true freshman, but Iowa State does not start freshmen lightly. And that's a guy that has gotten an outrageous amount of hype in the offseason, that he's going to be available this week, and he wasn't last week. Sounds like it was a game time decision last week. They just chose to sit him for an extra week because there's no sense in trying to accumulating more injuries, since there was, I would say, kind of got bit by the injury bug the last couple of weeks. And it's, if there's a concern on the defense, it's at linebacker. And like you said, if I were Iowa, I would attempt to just try to run Caleb Bacon straight at Iowa State all day and night.
Caleb Johnson, you mean?
Or sorry, yeah. What did I say? Did I say Caleb Bacon?
Bacon.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, Caleb Johnson. I would run Caleb Johnson straight at Iowa State for a while and see if you can start getting some space. That's how I would attack if I were Iowa, because Iowa State would love nothing more than to get Cade to throw 35 times in a game. They would love nothing more than to have Cade try to win this game with his arm. Because
I can't see that happening.
I don't see that happening, because I think this game is going to be a really super low possession game. Like, I know the over under set at like 36. I'm not sure it gets there. It's interesting because I think before the season, I would have said, frankly, there was like one key to this entire game, and is Iowa State going to turn the ball over? If Iowa State turns the ball over, Iowa's going to win. If they don't, Iowa State's going to win. And now there's a second key, which is, one, is Iowa State going to turn the ball over? And two, is Iowa's offense to what degree is Iowa's offense real? And that's the other big question here, is because obviously the first half was an abomination. I mean, I think you can agree with that. It was
offensively, but not defensively.
Well, no, but we're not talking about the defense. I mean,
you just said Iowa's defense. How for real is Iowa's defense?
I said offense, didn't I?
Okay, I heard defense. Okay.
How
real is Iowa's offense?
We're talking about Iowa's offense. So,
okay.
So the first half last week was an abomination. It was somehow worse than last year.
An abomination.
It was somehow worse.
Here we
than
go.
last year.
We're using biblical terms.
But anyways, so
nth degree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
I
wrong.
get your point.
I'm
6
not wrong
points
though.
Against Illinois State in the first half.
I'm not wrong. But so the second half, obviously they ticked it up. Part of it is I think Iowa was trying. It was a pretty big tick up, but it's against Illinois State, and it's the second half of a team that was probably pretty worn down at that point. And I was trying to move the ball vertically. They're trying to get something going in the passing game. So for some context here, because you watch the Iowa State game, and I think a lot of Iowa State fans came out of last Saturday feeling fairly about it, like not disappointed, but just kind of about it. And but what's interesting though is, and part of it is because Iowa State didn't they only had they put 21 points on the scoreboard, but there's an outrageous amount of context that needs to be added. There is where that one defensive drive, the one North Coast drive that lasted 12 and a half minutes, robbed Iowa State of the offense of one for sure, two probably, maybe three possessions.
Well,
just because of
just
eating.
To be clear, the same Iowa State defense that allowed that is going to Kinnick on Saturday.
Well, no, it's not. And I'll explain to you why. So that drive very specifically happened immediately after the Caleb Bacon injury. So, and Caleb Bacon is the guy with the headset on. what they were forced to do is take their entire plan at linebacker and they had to give somebody else the headset. And they had to completely reorganize on that drive. So one, John Haycock plays famously very, very vanilla defense in week one, basically calling no blitzes or anything. They just kind of sit back and cover 3, cover 2, and just figure it out type of thing. So they're already playing vanilla, and all of a sudden now they lost their quarterback on the defense. They lost the guy that had the headset and everything, so they had to totally reorganize on the fly. Now, that said, they should not have given up that many third downs, and even if you listen to their post-game interviews, all the players were said it was because they gave up yardage on first and second down that they shouldn't have given up, and they gave it up. Iowa State was perfect on shutting down third and long. So if anything, 3rd and 5 or longer, Iowa State was perfect in shutting that down. But when North Dakota was able to get to 3rd and 4 or shorter, they were able to often get the chains and convert via that quarterback just making something out of nothing, or just getting a run for 5 or 6 yards or something like that. And they were just able to put together a drive. And I tell you, in the stadium, it was miserable because it felt like it took 2 hours. But when you add that in to the fact and basically erase 2 possessions from the Iowa State offense, you're reducing their number of possessions quite a bit. I mean, Iowa State only ran the ball 18 times total in the game. Abusam had 5 carries and Carson Hansen had 6. So, they only put up 86 rushing yards, but they also didn't run that many offensive plays. And by the time they got to the fourth quarter, both teams were just chewing clock and just trying to get out of there because North Dakota seemed perfectly happy from the get-go to just try to not lose by 40. So they were chewing clock and chewing clock and chewing clock. And then you get to the second half and Matt Campbell's basically, they open up a 2-3 touchdown lead and they pretty much pull everybody off the field.
You think the 23 play drive was just North Dakota trying to chew clock?
I mean, it was partly that. I mean, it was also.
Sure.
I didn't say it was just. I literally just said that Iowa State should have gotten off the field more.
No, I'm just saying, like, yeah. I
mean,
guess
here's my point though is that that drive I would argue was largely a product of them. All of a sudden, they have to completely change what they were doing on defense because they lost Caleb Bacon right before that, and they have to rechange how they're communicating.
They also gave up a 14 play drive in the second half.
Sure. And you're still dealing with lots of very young linebackers.
Yeah, however, they're dealing with the same young linebackers this week.
I understand, but now you have an entire week to solidify your rotation, to solidify who's going to be running who's going to be here in the headset.
Sure,
you have an entire
got a better
week.
offensive line and a better running back core coming at them.
Absolutely. My point though is that I would be shocked if the linebackers looked kind of as unstable as they were last week because they have an entire week now to prep with whatever core they're going to go with, and they're also getting Cale Brazina back, which I think is big. Also, the defensive line they were like okay last week. They weren't great, but they were okay. They got a few plays in. I would expect that one to take a fairly big uptick there too, because I would say its defensive line has a lot of talent. Going into that, we heard like a lot in the offseason about how they were talking about going to some more 4-down stuff, just personnel based on personnel, doing some more like a 4-2-5 type of thing. To me, if you're ever going to do it, this is probably the time to try to work that in. You've got the defensive line talent to do it. You're already down a linebacker. You feel good about 2 to 3 of them for sure as far as starters go. Like you feel really good about Ebel. Sadowski started all of last year, so you're fine with him there. Zach Lovett is fine too. And then hopefully you can get Cale Brazina in there. You can have a 4-man rotation there, as a 4-2-5 type.
So who's coming down as that hybrid guy?
Well, if they're running the 4-2-5, then they're just going to run 4-2-5. If they're going to run if they're going to try to use what they've got with the 3-3-5 stack, Bo Freeler is big enough. He can come down and be a pseudo linebacker. I think they would probably prefer to keep him away from the line of scrimmage to keep him healthier, just because he's had so many shoulder problems for the last few years. But if they're going to the 4-2-5, you don't bring a safety down in a 4-2-5. But if they're going to try to still work with a 3-3 stack, I would guess that the 3 starting linebackers would be Cooper Ebel, then either Jack Sadowski or Zach Lovett, and then Cale Brazina on the other side. I would expect that to be your 3 if they're going to run with a 3-3 stack. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do. I mean, I have faith in John Haycock. He's one of the top 5 to 10 defensive coordinators in the country. I think at this point I've gotten enough faith out of him. I have enough faith in him that he'll get it figured out.
Who would you rank number 1 as defensive coordinator, Levi?
I mean, Phil Parker's probably in the conversation. I'm not too big to admit that Iowa has a good defensive coordinator. No, I mean, Phil Parker, and there's probably some other ones that are good too. But, I feel like John Haycock has a lot of respect around college football for a good reason.
Phil Parker's got a lot of respect for John Haycock.
Yeah. And
Kirk Ferentz has a lot of respect for John
Haycock. I think the coaching staffs all have a lot of respect for each other, especially now that Brian Ferentz has gone, not dragging the average down. But, as far as how Iowa State defensively will approach this game, it's going to be we'll see what it looks like on Saturday. They may choose to do the 3-3 stack if they feel really good about having like Ebel and Brazine on the outside with Sadowski or Love in the middle. If they feel good with that, they'll run with the 3-3 stack because that's just what Iowa State's run for the last 7.5 years. If they feel good about the 4-2-5 and they feel good about switching it, they'll do that. I would expect to see at least a good mix of both, if not even a lean towards the 4-2-5, just based on what's going on. They'll shift as the game goes, just like every good team does. They make adjustments through the game. So that's how I would expect to approach it. So yes, you're correct that the same defense that gave up some chunk yardage to North Dakota is still the same defense there, or at least in the run game anyways. But I think this week they will be dealing with a lot less chaos in the front 6, front 7 than they were last week.
I think the way I would sum all this up, Mark, and you can chime in if you want, but I would sum all of my takeaways about Iowa State up this way. If I'm an Iowa State fan, I don't really have concerns about the offense right now. What I have concerns with is what we just talked about, is their ability to stop the run. Because if Iowa runs the ball effectively, then it does set up play action, and Cade doesn't have to throw 35 times. He's just got to throw 15 times. Maybe
that's how I would
effective.
approach it if I were Iowa. I would just start running Caleb Johnson and see if Iowa State's defense can hang on for it, can slow him down. That's what. No, not slow him down like he's some unstoppable force. But right now you're dealing with those issues up front 6, front 7. If I were Iowa, I would try to test that all day and night. You don't need to test Iowa State's secondary. You know they're good. You need to test that front 6 and front 7 to see how solid it is.
If I'm Iowa in the first quarter, I'm running the stable of running backs, and I'm going to figure out who's the hot hand or stylistically who's the best weapon against this defense.
Yeah. Last year it was Jazz Patterson, and Jazz didn't play last week due to a suspension. He is back this week. Kirk confirmed that. And Caleb Johnson didn't play in the first half. He, of course, is back, fully back. I've been getting ripped all day, Mark. I've had several Iowa fans come after me because I have made the statement that I think Kamari Moulton is still their best back overall. Because it changes. And like throughout fall camp and throughout summer, that's all I was hearing was that Kamari was ascending and Caleb was kind of just stuck in neutral. And I'm not saying Caleb doesn't have impressive physical traits. I think that's what everybody likes to point back to is look at this guy's physique and he's 6'2". I'm like, okay. But guess what? You also have to do other things as related to vision, related to being willing to square your shoulders, put the pads down. Kamari Moulton really did a nice job in spite of the stats Saturday of playing through contact during a time in the game where Iowa's offensive line was struggling a little bit. It was more so that edge pressure that Illinois State was throwing at Iowa's backfield, and Kamari fought through that. I think we're going to see, like you said, Mark, a heavy dose of all these guys. I think it'd be foolish not to get Jazz Patterson some work, given the fact that he ran really well against Iowa State a year ago. And Leishon might be the odd man out this week because I don't know how healthy he is. To me, he didn't look right Saturday. But, hey, if you got 3 guys plus Leishon to run, great. And like you said, keep them all healthy and test to see who's hot that day because it may change on a week-by-week basis. And like I said, I still think that if there's one place where I look at Iowa State from Saturday's game, they kind of struggled to control the line of scrimmage against a very young and green North Dakota offensive line. So it's not just the linebackers to me, Levi. I didn't see a dominance up front that you would expect against a very young group of linemen. That also, by the way, real quick, context for Hawkeye fans, that North Dakota offensive line lost all conference freshman Cade Borod, who transferred to Iowa in the offseason. He was part of that offensive line a year ago for the Fighting Hawks.
Yeah, like I said, the defensive line wasn't spectacular last week or anything like that. I would expect them to take a fairly good jump this week, especially if they go to the 4 down front, because Tyler Onyedem, Dominique Orange, J.R. Singleton, Kennard Snyder is a very, very stout front 4, and on that defensive line, I would be pretty surprised if they didn't try to wheel that 4 out there at least to start the game and just to see how it works, type of thing. But Eli Rashid's a very good defensive line coach. I have faith in him to get things stabilized there.
So it's pronounced Onyedem?
Tyler Onyedem.
Onyedem. Okay. I was impressed with him. He was the one guy that stood out.
He's kind of a monster. If he can put his consistency together and really be a consistent motor, he's kind of a monster, especially physically. I mean, he's got a very, very high ceiling, I think.
He got a little bit of Will McDonald in him.
He's quite a bit bigger than Will McDonald. I think you can tell that he spent a little bit of time learning from Will McDonald because he's using a lot of those same spin moves that Will used. So you can see he's been watching some tape of Will. Little bit different. Like I said, he's a bigger athlete. I think he's probably got 30 pounds on Will, I would guess. So it'd be interesting, but I think he's got a very, very high ceiling.
And you know what I would bring up, and then Mark, if you want to take this conversation in a different direction, but here's what I will bring up about Saturday after watching the game on television. It sounds like you were in the stadium for the game, Levi, but one thing that
frying my ass off, it was so hot.
One thing that the FS1 commentators noted during the game is, hey, sometimes they say if you've got 2 punters, you've got none, and special teams are always a big deal in this game. So Iowa State played 2 punters on Saturday, which, like it or not, that probably is an indication they're not real confident in either. It's not like playing.
Actually, completely disagree on that one.
But you don't play two punters when you're
the reason Iowa State wheeled two punter is because Jace Gilbert has proven himself to be a very good pooch punter. I don't know if you watched what he kicked, but he was a very good short yardage punter. Tyler Perkins has a big leg, but he struggles with on the opponent's half of the field. Jace Gilbert's he proved himself last week to be a very good pooch punter.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Having two punters and having two quarterbacks could not be more different. I know Iowa believes that punting is quarterbacking, but I promise you they're different positions.
No, Iowa just doesn't need two players to fulfill one role.
I mean, Iowa's punter was not awesome last week. He was okay, but he wasn't Tory Taylor.
Well, they didn't need him. They scored 40 points.
They needed him in the first half, and he was not very good.
He was okay. He was okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I saw was Tyler Perkins had a very good long punt in the game, and Jace Gilbert had two very good short punts. Who gives a shit if it's the same guy? They did their job. What could it possibly matter?
Well, I'll tell you what it matters. Because
I'll tell you what, Iowa's that 2.5 point favorite on Iowa. That's coming from Iowa State playing the second punter last week.
Yeah. Let's I'm sure it does. So let's just see, because like I said, Iowa, you've seen a guy in Tory Taylor who's been able to pooch. He's been able to kick the long balls.
I've been on the record saying Tory Taylor was the third Hawkeye ever.
But I'm simply saying, if you're real confident in your punter, it's a guy who can do both. And the Iowa State does not have that right now. So
it doesn't need it if you have two guys that can do it. Iowa State's going to moneyball the position.
You better hope you don't get
Jason. You don't replace Jason Giambi. You recreate him in the aggregate, and that's what Iowa State is doing with the punting situation.
Mark, you want to?
I feel like this is a non-issue. I don't know why we're talking about this.
Well, I understand the question from Corey, because it does appear that way on the surface. But if you don't know what the situation is, if you've got one guy with a booming leg that's going to kick everything minus 50 and then everything inside the plus 50, you go with the.
Well, first of all, I just looked at the stats. Tyler Perkins' long was of 40. So let's not act like he's the second coming of Tory Taylor.
I didn't say he was, but he's a better long punter. He's a better long punter than Jace Gilbert.
And
Jace
Gilbert was 40?
Well, he's had better longs in his career. I mean, that's
okay.
Well, but his long on Saturday was of 40, and Jace's long was 30.
What did he punt once?
Twice for 77 yards.
Wow.
So he had a 40 and he had
2 data points is a trend, I guess.
Had a 40 and he had a 37.
Okay,
that's
Tyler Perkins is a junior that's been here maybe he's a senior now. He's got a long career of being a good punter.
What will happen?
This is a very silly conversation,
Mark. What happens on Saturday if Reese Dakin takes the first punt and he literally punts it out of the stadium? What will Levi say at that point?
I want to test that guy for steroids. Is what I'm doing here. No, so what I saw. I'm not even going to talk about the punting. That's stupid. This is a dumb conversation about the punting thing, but. I think one thing we should probably talk about is the other side, flip this around with Iowa State's offense versus Iowa's defense, because I think this is actually probably the more interesting situation here because it's strength on strength.
By the way, Reese Dakin had a long of 46. Yes, I would agree with you. Like I say, I don't think there's any reason to really question. I mean, I look at the stat sheet. I'm like, why did Abusama only run 5 times? I looked at the stats, and why did Ben Bramer not catch a single ball? So you tell us.
Ben Bramer was banged up last week, so he only played like 18 snaps.
Well, I watched him get targets.
He got one
they
target.
Didn't get him. No, he got 2 targets. He had 2 targets.
Okay, so he got 2 targets.
I'm just saying at least 2 targets. I saw the 2 targets. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, he got 2 targets because he was banged up last week. He just didn't play a lot.
Why would you not run the ball? Why would Hansen get more? Didn't Hansen have more rushes than Sama?
Sama got nicked up in the third quarter, and he did not come back in.
Okay.
I mean, he's fine, but he's fine, but they just didn't play him in the fourth quarter. They didn't need to. There's no reason risking Abu Sama if you don't have to. In a game that was over and done with. That's why they ran Jalen Jackson a bunch in the fourth quarter too. So
I think so. Sama had the hurdling of the defender in the first quarter, which
nice
everybody you probably had to get a fresh change of shorts, didn't you, Levi?
Bro, that happened after the first drive. I didn't bring a third pair of shorts with.
I guess what I would say on that is Abu Sama is terrific. Breece Hall was terrific. David Montgomery was terrific. And Montgomery had one game against Iowa, I believe it was in 2017.
It was the 2017 explosion.
When both teams went nuts offensively in that game. And they scored
what a fun game that was. I wish we would have won, but
but in general, Iowa's done a pretty good job of containing those Iowa State backs that have been really good against everybody else. And I know Sama improved as the year went on last year, but I have a hard time seeing this group of linebackers / tackles like
So-
breaking that trend. Do you real quick? Can we just acknowledge something right now? Aaron Graves was really good Saturday. Y.A. Black ate up a lot of double teams on Saturday. They have 2 All-Americans in Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, and a third guy in Kyler Fisher who looked pretty good and is really versatile, plus Sebastian Castro, who might be the best overall player on the team. I think it's going to be hard for everybody and anybody to run against this front.
Iowa's defense is good and the sky is blue. I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like,
No, I'm just saying.
like,
I'm just saying. They historically Iowa State doesn't run the ball great against Iowa, in spite of the fact that they usually have really
5
good
years
backs.
outside of good running backs, they don't run the ball very well on anybody. But I think you can approach this team a little bit differently. One, and I think this is an interesting discussion to have here, because I think we're going to see something a little bit different for whatever reason. For the first 8 years of the Matt Campbell tenure, for whatever reason, Matt Campbell decided that the best way to try to beat Iowa is to try to beat Iowa by being Iowa. And if anybody has ever found that out, trying to beat Iowa at their own game is never a good idea. There's nobody that does Iowa better than Iowa. So if you try to run inside zone right into the middle of the defense, you're not going to have a good time and you're going to lose. So you can't do that. And unfortunately, so in the past, Tom Manning and even a little bit Nate Shieldhaas, they tended to be stubborn with running the ball. They wanted to establish a running game first and then go from there. And if it didn't show up in the first quarter, they were going to keep trying in the second quarter. If it didn't show up in the second quarter, they're going to keep trying in the third quarter. And that's just what they were going to do. They got very stubborn with running the ball. I think what we saw last week is a couple really interesting developments. One, jokingly, the Iowa State has always does the first play of the season is always just inside zone in the A gap for 1 yard. That's just what it is. Kind of like Iowa always ran outside zone for 2 yards to start every game for the first 20 years of the Kirk Ferentz era type thing. Same kind of joke or whatever, but then they come out last week and do the thing. They chuck 2 deep bombs and get a touchdown in 38 seconds. And part of that is new offensive coordinator Taylor Mauser. And I think what we saw last Saturday was a couple of really interesting developments. We saw one, that he's very willing to use the passing game to open up the running game. And this is not an offensive coordinator that is going to be stubborn about the running game. Iowa State knows that their stable of receiver, that basically nobody they play is going to have enough corners and safeties to really cover all of Iowa State's weapons in the passing game on every play. So, and they know that they're not going to get stubborn with the running game this time. They're going to use the passing game to open up the running game. I think this is finally the Iowa State offense that understands that when you have the personnel to do it, using the passing game to open up the running game is just as good as using the running game to open up the passing game. Just depends on how you use it. And I think another interesting thing to take away from this is that last Saturday we saw 2 different ways that Iowa State can be really dangerous in the passing game. Obviously, at the beginning of the game, we saw that they can be very good on explosive plays. They have Jalen Nolan, Jaden Higgins that can be very explosive receivers downfield and that are capable of taking the top off. Or in Jalen's case, honestly, in Jalen's case, coming on crossing routes and then taking it to the house after the catch. But we also saw on the 99 or 97 yard drive, whichever it was, we saw them dink and dunk and really tear through North Dakota's defense all the way up the field with the passing game. They sprinkled in some run here and there, but really they used the passing game to work their way upfield. And something like that, I think, is the exact formula that you want to use to try to beat Iowa. Now, you're going to try to work in some deep ball stuff when you can, because I think Iowa could be vulnerable over the top. Like if they send Jaden Higgins on a deep post and try to make Xavier Wampa cover him downfield, I think that's a matchup Iowa State likes. So you're not going to do that all the time, but you're going to use that to try to stretch them out a little bit more. But Iowa State found 2 different formulas that the passing game can be successful. And we've seen now too, that when it needs to, Iowa State is perfectly happy to go to a pass heavy offense. They're not going to bat an eye at throwing the ball 40 times in a game or 40 or 45 times if that's what they need to do to win. And I think that's a big change from what we've seen in the past. I don't expect this to be a Cyhawk game where Iowa State tries to out Iowa. I think they've finally kind of turned that corner and started to learn that to do Iowa, you have to do what Purdue did, which is to spread them out and cause lots of problems and make Iowa defend the entire field. Purdue kind of had Iowa's number there for a little while, and That's what they did. They took their athletes and they spread them out sideline to sideline, and they made Iowa cover the whole field. And I think, and I know that Iowa State has the athletes at receiver and running back to do that. So I think we saw last weekend with Taylor Mauser a willingness and an enthusiasm for doing exactly that. We saw the explosive plays. We saw them be patient and dink and dunk their way up the field, and they scored on both of those. So we saw last week that the passing game was as good as advertised, and we kind of got a surprise in finding the third receiver already, which is a nice development, because that was kind of the question, is who was going to be the third guy. So the passing game turned out to be as good as advertised. Fortunately, in the second half, they really didn't need to do much offensively. They kind of just started chewing clock a lot in the second half, because I think both teams just kind of wanted to get out of there. And for Iowa State specifically, to avoid more injuries. But then North Dakota seemed like perfectly happy to just take their 20-point loss and leave. So like I said, we didn't get a huge volume of it, but for context on the offenses here, Iowa had this big, points explosion last week, scored 40 points. Obviously, that's the best Iowa's offense has looked in 5 years at least, since CJ Beathard. And Iowa fans are rightfully kind of over the moon about it. Certainly the vibes are with Iowa this week if you're a believer in that kind of thing. The fan bases are certainly more confident in Iowa City than they are in Ames. Iowa averaged 6.9 yards per play last week. Iowa State averaged 7.4. Iowa State fans came away underwhelmed by an offensive performance in which they, on a rate basis, outperformed Iowa who performed in a way that their fans are over the moon about. So that's some context here.
Well, okay, but we can put together the same context, go back to every other opener in the last 10 years, most of which Iowa, the same years in which Iowa has won most of those games against Iowa State. I guarantee you the disparity between points per play in those openers between Iowa and Iowa State.
What I'm telling you though is that I'm not going to say Iowa's offense peaked last week, but they showed a lot. Maybe they did peak last week.
Well, they could have. It's the worst team on the schedule. Sure. It's the worst team in the schedule.
There was a lot of stuff that I would kind of got away with in the second half that they're just not going to get away with against any Power 5 team. Especially that one. It was like a Cade threw it off like a duck off his back foot, and Iowa just kind of caught it in the end zone out of nowhere.
That made you mad. That made you mad.
That shit's getting picked off 12 times out of 10. It just is. I respect Iowa for getting it together in a way that doesn't make their fans want to puke, but what make me want to puke as an Iowa fan is if I had to lose to Iowa State 80% of the time. That's what would make me what's actually a funny number though. John Walters brought this up in the post game last week, is that even though Iowa has won 8 of the last 9 total, Iowa State has won 3 out of the last 5 at Kinnick.
Oh, it's actually more than 80%. Thank you. I didn't realize it was more
in
than
a very
80%.
Specific time frame. Sure. If you go back to 2000, it's virtually even. Or if you go back to the beginning of the Kirk Ferentz era, it's virtually even.
How do you go 1-9 in 10 years and go 3-2?
Well, you got to remember that 2020
COVID.
they didn't play at
Sure.
Kinnick, so they played 2 games in a row at Jack Trice.
Right.
So it's kind of weird. So Kirk Ferentz has not beaten Iowa State at Kinnick this decade. I just wanted to let everybody
One
know
more
that.
thing for Kirk to add to his resume.
I just want to know that Paul Rhodes was the coach the last time Iowa beat Iowa State at Kinnick. So,
and if I'm not mistaken, go back to the Paul Rhodes era. He has a better win percentage against Iowa than Matt Campbell does. Correct?
Against Iowa, yeah, not against
Iowa.
everybody else.
You want to know? Well, but you want to know part of the reason. I'll say this. I know routinely people that are listeners that are Iowa fans are going to come on here and rip you. So I respect you for being on here in spite of knowing that you're going to get ripped, Levi.
I'm not scared.
I respect
you. Scared of you guys.
I respect you. No, not you guys. I'm not ripping you.
No. I'm talking about Iowa fans as a general population.
But here's what I'll say about it. I do think you're right about something. I think you're onto something when you talk about spreading Iowa out, because I think that's the only way you have a chance. Now, I'm not saying it's going to work, because I still think Iowa can play that way, and they've adjusted over the years. I remember back in 2022? I was in West Lafayette for that game. I don't remember what year it was, but it was after Iowa struggled against Purdue. Yeah, because they lost in 21 when they were undefeated. And I think at that point, Phil Parker figured out how to play Purdue. And now Jeff Brom moved on, so we didn't get to see the recent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that Iowa can't defend spread out teams. That's obviously not what I'm saying. But that's a much better plan to beat Iowa than running it up the gut, 40 times in a game. And I think Iowa State has finally figured that out because I think for the first 8 years, Matt Campbell tried to out Iowa, which was a dumb plan. It worked one time, but it was
and it narrowly worked.
it narrowly worked one time, but that's how Iowa always wins game is narrowly worked.
Can I get you to admit something, Levi? I just want you to
sure.
get.
I want to tell you Iowa's defense is good again. Or what?
No, I want you to admit something. All right, I want you to I want you to look at everybody on this show, and I want you to admit that Iowa State. I don't believe in luck, but the game in 2022 was as fortunate for Iowa State as you could possibly imagine, with some of the things that happened in that game. Just everything about that game. They got
bounces. I mean, it seems like every side.
Well, it wasn't just bounces.
It has some lucky bounces.
Like the 2021
game. Like the 2021 game, Iowa got some pretty friendly bounces and stuff like that, too.
What do you mean? Dominated that game. What are you talking
about? Or maybe I think in 2019. Oh, 2019. Iowa got a dumb lucky bounce. I got a dumb luck play on that punt return. Stuff like that. Okay. So
I would give you that. But
the first thing I will admit is that every Cyhawk, the new dumbest thing you've ever seen happens. Like that's the trend. That's the only constant about Cyhawk is that someone on one of the teams will commit the dumbest thing you've ever seen.
That's why we call them the Cyclones. Hey, I'm just saying the dumb thing normally comes from the boys in red, not the boys in gold.
You're 100% correct. And like the last, especially with the Matt Campbell era, if they've lost in a dumb way, it's obviously been Iowa State typically. 2022 it was Iowa, but now it's whatever.
Yeah, but I wouldn't even. 2022 is just like mistake after mistake after. Mistake. I wouldn't say they were dumb.
You know what's funny though is I remember us talking about that season, like before talking about this game before that season. And we were both in agreement that Iowa was probably going to win because Iowa State was really young. They were moving in a new quarterback and all this, forever. And at the end of the show, I remember quipping, he's like, but it doesn't make any sense. So Iowa State will probably win. And then we were both like, And then, then it happened.
Let's not forget that 2021 was, what were we talking about? 21 or 22? 22. That was coming.
Iowa State won at Kennedy.
Yeah, that was coming on the heels of Iowa's debacle against South Dakota State week 1. So I was not that confident heading into week 2. I didn't know what to think.
I think it was the preseason one that we kind of agreed that Iowa was going to win. Be. I think that's what it was. Just a funny thing I remember the other day. But
Mark, we've got like 15 minutes left. Can you please tee us up on a segment that people I know really enjoy? And that is for Levi and I to make our picks when you go position by position. I know people love when we do this.
I would love this. First, Corey, I would like a brief answer from you on 2 Cade McNamara related topics. Number 1 would be, considering everything we heard out of Kirk and out of Tim Lester during August, that I know that I took a little bit more from it than you did in Cade not looking the best, and that quarterback decision was made late in camp. Are you encouraged by the way he threw the ball on Saturday? Number 1.
Yeah.
Number 2. Where's my guy, Brendan Sullivan?
Agreed.
They're struggling to score the entire first half.
Well,
why doesn't he get on the field? And then they've got the opportunity when they're up by 30 or 40 points in the second half to get him on the field. I
had a long conversation with Coach Patterson about this on the Sunday night show, and I'll just condense this back for the sake of time. I agree with you, and I am disappointed that they did not give Sullivan meaningful snaps. And I think that was a Kirk decision. I don't think that was a Seth Wallace or a Tim Lester decision. I believe that was premeditated, pre-discussed, and that was ultimately a Kirk Ferentz decision. I agree with you. Up 33-0, there's no reason at that point not to put Brendan or Marco in the game and give him meaningful snaps, as opposed to putting him in with a minute and a half and handing the ball off 2 or 3 times. I agree with you on that. I don't know about the first half, because as I was watching the game Saturday, I'm thinking, like, it was close, and some people felt like Brendan was the better option coming out of camp. But I do wonder, when you decide, okay, we're going with Cade to start the game, to start the season, pulling him in less than a half when you're ahead. I know it wasn't a big lead, but I do think that could mess with his psyche. So I don't know about pulling him at that point. And then once he got rolling in the third and even early fourth, I don't know that you pull him then either, because he's rolling and you want to keep that rhythm going. But I agree with you on, when you're up 33-0, at that point, let's move on. I was encouraged by his arm. He made a couple of poor decisions, one being when he's falling down, he throws it into double coverage, and it's caught by Reese Vandersee. Again, having a receiver that can bail you out's great, but that was a bad decision. He had another throw that he underthrew Luke Lachey badly, and it could have easily been a touchdown. Lachey had his guy beat over the top, and So he underthrew a couple of guys, and that, to me, I'm no QB's guru, but it looked like footwork to me. Both of those throws were off his back foot. The one was he's falling backwards. So I would hope Tim Lester is going to have that corrected this week. And I'd say I was most impressed by his mobility. He had one play, I think the play of the game from Cade, without question, was a play, and I don't remember when it was, if it maybe it was early third, when he's pressured and scrambling and flushed right, flushed left, and then he's running left and throws it back across it. Well, not totally across his body, but throws down the sideline and puts the ball on the money to a young tight end in Zach Ortworth. That was a really gorgeous play by Cade McNamara. So that's made me, kind of perk up when I saw that. But yeah, I think just the mobility, it looks like he's comfortable back there now. And it didn't look like that at Kids Day. I can tell you that firsthand. It did not look like he was comfortable back there. So I believe Kirk when he says, hey, he's looked more comfortable, but it was going to take him some time to settle in. However, Mark, I said it to you this morning when I joined your live show briefly. I have to see it against Iowa State. I'm not bought into this offense. Like people, Iowa's got an offense now. Like, okay, I get it. People want an offense. They want to see this, but they got to prove it against someone other than Illinois State, and they got to prove it more than 2 quarters. Like, they just do. Now, if they do it against Iowa State, say they go out and they score 30. I don't think they're going to get there, but if they were to do that against Iowa State, regardless of how it looks, I mean, unless it's 2 or 3 pick sixes, I'm probably going to walk away, so, overall being like, hey, yeah, I think they've got something right now. But I said back in July and August that I thought it was going to take a month for the passing game to evolve. And so if they come out there and struggle to throw the ball against Iowa State, it's not panic button time. I continue to say this. They're going to win this game. If they're going to win it, they're going to win it on the ground and being very opportunistic with play action. And if they can't run the ball effectively against Iowa State, then that's just like it was in the first half against Illinois State. I'm going to be like, that's a concern. And I think John Haycock, he's a lot smarter than any of us are. He's going to have that pegged as his key. We got to figure out a way to slow them down on the ground and make them beat us over the top. So I think that's where the game comes down to. And let me just respond to Hair Trigger in our chat earlier that made the comment you put up on the screen, Mark. He said, I have a hard time seeing Iowa State scoring. That, with all due respect, I think that's a naive comment to make. Because when you watch the game, and go back and watch the game against North Dakota Saturday, Iowa State looked very, very proficient through the air at times. They just didn't have, Levi's right, they just didn't have the ball very much. And I thought it was peculiar that they didn't run more with Sama even when he was in there. Because, I mean, even if he was out in the third quarter, Levi still only finished with 3 carries. But they did open the game throwing the ball. And, I mean, Noel and what was it, Green?
Jaden Higgins, Eli Green, yeah.
They were all very good. And so we've seen Iowa State, even last year in Jack Trice, they figured a way through the air to get back in that game at the tail end and give themselves a chance. They didn't pull it out, but they have, I mean, even go back to the 2022 game when what's his face beat Riley Moss for the
Xavier
one.
Hutchinson. Yep.
Hutchinson beat Riley Moss for the 1 touchdown of the game. If Iowa State's going to win, they're likely going to do it by taking advantage of Iowa's corners.
And that's kind of the point I was making earlier too, is that like the good things that Iowa State should take away from last weekend is that they established that the passing offense is every bit as good as we thought it was going to be. And that they have the scheme put together that if they can find holes in Iowa's secondary, that's a place where they're talented enough to do damage if they can find some room. And that's really the point I'm trying to make here, is that they can use that. And then hopefully if they can use that with the passing game and get moving downfield, then the running game can open up from there. And then if you can get room for Abu Sama, anything's possible. So, that's.
But I just want to say, I'm not making a prediction that Iowa State's going to win. I'm just simply saying if they're going to win, they do have a passing attack. They proved that Saturday, and absolutely. I already suspected that they had a passing attack.
Yeah. And
we didn't see anything from the tight ends. So that's,
Yeah, Bramer was basically not included in the passing game because he was banged up. So they, like, whatever they did passing wise last Saturday, is as impressive as they did look in the passing game, that is not including Ben Bramer.
Let me just say this. If Iowa I see some people in the chat. If Iowa shuts out Iowa State Saturday, if they win like 24-0, Mark, then hold the phones, because
Then you can probably pretty clearly name Iowa top 3 defense in college football and maybe better, maybe not 3 type of thing.
Well, yeah, I'll be very impressed if they do that. I over and over again, that's one thing Paul Rhodes was able to do at times as well. You mentioned spreading teams out. I used to think every year we should expect a trick play or some sort of trickeration from Iowa State. We haven't seen that as much in recent time for Matt
Campbell's
Campbell.
not a trick play guy.
Well, it was successful at times.
Paul Rhodes is the riverboat gambler, but Matt Campbell is whatever the opposite of a riverboat gambler.
I think
he's the guy that didn't buy the ticket. He's sitting on the shore on the park bench watching the river.
But Levi, I think against Phil Parker, that's the way to go at times.
It's I don't listen. You're not going to hear any protests from me that Iowa State should run a trick play or two once in a while. But and I shouldn't say that they've never run a trick play. I mean, there's been a couple of times where they've converted on double passes and stuff. Actually, they did against Iowa in 2019. Yep. So it's not like they'll never do it, but like I said, Matt Campbell's not the riverboat gambler that Paul Rhodes was. So it's kind of we'll see. I have confidence that they've got a game plan put together to try to really use passing game as the primary way to attack Iowa, and then use the running game where it makes sense.
2019 was the 2 delay game. Mark,
how much time do you guys have?
I'm good for whenever. Like I can keep going.
I got I
got 10 minutes.
You got 10 minutes. Here we go. Let's size up Cyhawk, tail of the tape time, position by position. With all the early season big matchups that have gone blowout fashion, I would be shocked if this was anything more than a 2-score game. I just think that this is going to be a great game once again. Here we go. Iowa State. Let's start at quarterback. McNamara versus Becht, or the complete quarterback room. Levi, go.
Rocco, and I don't think it's that close.
Well, again, you're talking about complete. You said or complete room. If we're just talking starter,
well, we're not. Let's not play complete room. We're playing one football.
Wait, what happened to J.J. Cole? Why didn't he play?
Connor Mobley got the snaps over him.
Yeah, well, why didn't J.J. Cole play?
I guess Connor Mobley is beating him in camp.
Interesting, very interesting. So
I've heard a lot of really good things about Connor Mobley.
Yeah, but you also heard a lot of good things about J.J. Cole last year.
Well, in camp, I actually didn't hear as much about J.J. Cole as I've heard about Connor Mobley. It doesn't really matter as long.
Okay, I will take Rocco. Absolutely, at the top, I would give him the nod, even though Cade was really good statistically on Saturday. Go ahead.
One thing that's worth noting about Rocco here too is that someone actually, I think it was maybe Chris Williams that brought it up on their Two Guys podcast the other day, that I hadn't really thought about it, but it makes a lot of sense actually, is that in games like this, you would take Rocco probably over Brock Purdy, because as much as Brock Purdy is the all-time cult hero not even cult hero, just the hero for Iowa State football of all time. He had a lot of that Brett Favre where sometimes he's gonna do a lot of crazy things that some of them are gonna work and some are really not gonna work. And like if you look in 2021, Iowa got in his head and he was terrible, and that's why he got benched. Rocco is not that guy. He's not the gunslinger that Brock was. In a game like this, where it's against a ball hawking defense in a road game in a tough environment, you'd rather have Rocco than even Brock Purdy in this, because he's just a very level-headed guy that doesn't make a lot of bad decisions.
What's this thing, by the way? What's this thing with Iowa State quarterbacks that they need these hard stone rock names, Brock and
well, they all got to name. They all got to be able to be puns with October, which is when Iowa State's good.
Okay. So, go ahead, Mark. You want to?
Well, we can move it on to the running back room. Corey, you can start there.
The running back room. Yeah, I think you got to evaluate the room, right? You don't just, because it's not just a one-man show. I will take Iowa State because I think Iowa State has a much better lead horse right now, but I think it's very close.
I think I like Iowa State's top 2 better than like Iowa's top 2. Beyond the 2, you're looking at like Jalen.
I don't know about that. I like the number 1 much more than the Iowa.
I like Iowa State's number 1 quite a bit better. I would argue that Hansen was very good on Saturday, and he's a different back than Sama. But whether or not you like the number 2 back is probably just a matter of you're an Iowa fan and Iowa State fan. So it's
I think it's very close.
It's honestly, it's probably a push beyond Sama and whoever the starter is.
I think I like Sama a lot, so I'll take Iowa State, Mark.
Well, the next one seems to be a slam dunk. So we'll include the tight ends into the wide receiver position and go for the incomplete wide receiver room.
Gerrymandering these now or what?
Levi.
Even if you throw in the tight ends, I think it's pretty clearly Iowa State's. As far as if you're just talking about pass catching options, I don't think it's even close.
So wait. We're combining the two together? Why are we doing
tight ends in the receiver group?
Okay, well then I guess it's Iowa State. But if we split the two apart, then it's clearly Iowa at tight end and clearly Iowa State at wide receiver. So
Yeah, I think the gap between Iowa State and Iowa at receiver is a lot bigger than the gap between Iowa and Iowa State at tight end.
Yeah, we'll see. We don't know that. Iowa's receivers looked good Saturday, and they get Caleb Brown back this week.
What I know is that I finally know the name of one Iowa receiver, and that's Vander Zee.
Well, that's your problem.
But you know at least 3 Iowa State receivers, and I know 1 Iowa receiver.
So, as O-line, I'll take Iowa.
Yeah.
Up front.
Iowa State's pass protection did look good on Saturday, but the running game still needs work for sure. So if you were asking me to take one, I would probably take Iowa's offensive line.
Okay, as we go to the defense, let's also give an indication of how much you like your winner of the 2 units. Like, what is the gap between the two?
Mark's trying to create controversy.
I'll say Mark's gerrymandering the hell out of these rankings. What the hell's going on here?
So D-line, I guess we're flipping the script here. D-line.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably take Iowa. I don't know as much about I mean, I know the
I mean, I think every Iowa State fan is pretty high on Iowa State's defensive line. I mean, Iowa's probably got the better individual player like an Aaron Graves, but as a unit, I would probably almost call it a push.
Okay. I'm not going to argue that because I don't know enough about Iowa State's line, but I do think Graves and Wyatt Black were really good Saturday, and Brian Allen Jr.
I want to highlight here Chevy Yoda over here. Levi got named some Iowa wide receivers this weekend. Yeah, that's because I'm going to be looking at the back of their jerseys on the sidelines, you idiot. Not gonna.
I love it. I love this stuff. All right,
I'll be dead and buried before I recognize an Iowa wide receiver.
Linebacker.
And by the way, I'm not gerrymandering anything. I think it's valid when, let's say, Iowa's got the best linebackers in the country, and Iowa State could have exceptional linebackers, but they're not going to be better. But it would.
I was more talking about the wide receiver tight end
on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, sure.
You don't want to see. I want to know if it's 10-3 or if it's 10 to
sure.
I think
9.
I think Iowa linebacker discussion is like 10-1.
It's not a 1, but it's probably
it's the biggest. It's bigger than there's a bigger gap there between Iowa State's receivers and Iowa's receivers. Okay, there has to be right now. Evaluating,
I think the gap is probably the same
without Caleb Bacon. I don't know about that. I don't know how you could possibly say that with a bunch of inexperienced guys.
The funny part about losing Caleb Bacon is he was basically exclusively an edge rusher last year. So him playing in the middle linebacker was an experiment that lasted 1 quarter, not even a full quarter. So it's kind of interesting. The Caleb Bacon thing is kind of a Schrodinger's linebacker thing where you assume that he was going to be a very good middle linebacker in there, but we actually didn't see him there. We know he's a good edge rusher, and that's what we know he's really good at. We didn't really know how he was going to fit in the middle of the defense. I mean, they talk about him being like kind of the leader of the room and being the guy that, he's got the heads, he's got the earpiece in and all that. But we really didn't see what Caleb Bacon looks like as a middle linebacker controlling the defense. So it's kind of one of the, like, I would say maybe in a situation until he comes back of like you can't lose what you didn't have type of thing. So that's a silver lining to put on. It sucks that Caleb Bacon's hurt. But the guys that they did, like I said, I thought Cooper Ebel was great last Saturday, and I think he's a rising star in that linebacker room. I think Caleb Brzezina's right behind him. I don't love playing true freshman linebackers at Iowa, but famously, the last one. Do you know who the last one to do it was? No. Mike Rose. And that worked out for him.
You better hope they have another Mike Rose.
And in that game in 2018, that was another really close one that I would just say kind of lost in a dumb fashion. Mike Rose was an animal that game.
You know what? Hair Trigger 83 makes a great point in his last comment. He says Iowa's backup linebackers are probably better than Iowa State's, and I would agree,
but you can only
that.
Play 3 at a time.
I know, but I would just say if they go down, you feel pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's arguing that Iowa's got a big advantage at linebacker.
Okay, so
I don't know that it's a lot bigger than Iowa State at receiver, but that's kind of semantics.
I'll give Iowa State the nod at safety. And even though Iowa's pretty good at safety,
Iowa State's
with Xavier Wampa.
Yeah,
well, Quinn Schulte's back for a 6th year, and Xavier Wampa's back. So, I mean, they're really good. And then where does Sebastian Castro figure in? Are we counting him as a linebacker? Are we counting him as we haven't even brought
Sebastian
up
Castro is Bo Freeler. They're a safety, but they're big enough to be linebacker. They just kind of float around and do whatever.
And then you've got
Iowa's always got a guy like that.
You've got corner that I would say probably is Iowa.
Probably I would call it a push. Like if you saw last week, Jontez Williams, he did make a couple mistakes, but otherwise actually played a really nice game. And I think Darian Porter is kind of a really slept on corner over there. He had a very, very nice game. And at 6'4" and a former Iowa Sprint champion, he's got the athleticism and the size to contend with any receiver that anybody throws at him. So and then Miles Purchase is the stalwart in the Iowa State defense. He's played a base every game since the middle of the 2021 season, basically. He's about as rock solid as it gets. He's not going to blow you away. He's not going to be a day 2 pick in the NFL or anything like that, but he's a very rock solid corner that you feel good about. But I think Jontez Williams showed quite a bit last week, and I think Darian Porter had a very, very slept on game last week too. So I would personally call it a push.
Let's just combine special teams as a whole.
I guess the kickers and punters all did their job last week for both teams.
When you get 2 punters, I think that,
as far as I'm concerned, that means that's a win for Iowa State. They've got 2 punters. But Iowa State typically doesn't do like a ton in the return game. But what they did last week, the few times they did return it, it was good. It seems like they're trying to have more of an emphasis to try to capture some of that extra field position that Iowa has made hay on for a long time. As far as winning that field position battle, getting a return for 10 yards is big. On a punt return, getting an extra 10 yards can be a huge advantage. So, Hawkeye Howard, that's the dumbest shit I've ever read.
Hey, and Hawkeye Howard, Levi believes that you might be suffering from CTE.
Maybe, but that's
better at every position, yet they'll win the game by 3.
Like,
I want to make a graphic.
I want to hear that. I want to hear Hawkeye Howard make an argument that Iowa's receivers are better than Iowa State's. I want to hear that argument and watch and just listen to the brain rot.
Hey, Mark, we got to make, one of us has to make a graphic, a 2-part graphic with Levi's picks at every position and my pick. Maybe I'll do that.
They're probably pretty close. I mean, we agree on some, and there's some that are like close where it's like, maybe a slightly in this way, but pretty close.
Yeah, running back's the only one that I'm like, I still don't know. I don't know how to pick that because I picked Iowa State, but if you go 1 through 4, it's Iowa.
But then you look at like Iowa State doesn't play 4 running backs in a game, so like their 4th running back doesn't matter, like because you're not going to see the 4th running back unless some catastrophic cascade of injuries happens. But no, that's not typically what happens in a football game.
Cascade, no pun intended. Go ahead, Mark.
We are there. We've completed. Unless we want to rate coaches, do we want to rate the coaching staffs against each other?
Well, I mean, right now the OCs are both very much question marks.
I mean, if you, I don't think Taylor Reynolds is a question mark at this point, frankly.
What's he this is his first game, and by the way, Tim Lester had a better performance than he did.
Did he? Because Taylor
40.
Taylor Mauser outgained him on rate stats.
On what?
On rate, like yards per play, which is like the best way to rank an offense is yards per play. If you're start ranking offense on points and total yards here, we're on a different planet of conversation here.
Total
offense. That's a 1980 stat.
A lot. Well, hey, you talk to a lot of offensive coaches. Even Chuck Long has made the statement that the best way to evaluate an offense is total offense. Chuck Long has even said this.
Chuck Long played offense. 200 years ago. The guy's a dinosaur. Are you telling me that Chuck Long?
I am a big yards per play guy.
Chuck Long is the arbiter of all good things.
It's irrelevant. I'm not saying yards per play is irrelevant, but total offense is the best.
What I know is the people that know
stat.
ball have not used total offense in 20 years.
Yeah, nobody uses total offense.
Nobody
statement.
Nobody that knows what they're talking about uses total offense. That's a crazy stat to use. That total offense is an insane stat to use. It's all because it depends on how many possessions there is in a game. It depends on how many total plays are you running and like how it's just like time of possession. Time of possession is a stupid stat.
Nothing you say is wrong necessarily, Levi.
Crazy.
I agree with what you're saying, but to say that nobody uses it, all you have to do is flip on a pregame show and they've got total offense and total defense.
Well, and people still drive Ford Pintos, but doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Saying total offense is widely the accepted stat.
No, it's not. No,
yes, it is. Yes, it is. Every time we hear about Iowa's offense being the worst in the country over the last 3 years, we see the stat of
you can
total
look at
offense.
it at the rate stats too. You don't have
we don't hear those. Those are not the stats that people talk about.
Question. Who are you listening to?
Anybody and everybody.
No, don't give me that. No. Are you listening to ESPN or are you listening to analytics people?
Listen, there's a place for all of these
There's nobody at Pro
stats.
Football Focus that has looked at the total offense stat in 5 years.
There is not a perfect stat. Okay,
No,
we have to
there's
look
not.
at all of them.
There's not.
But I will continue on my stance, and that's knowing that Iowa's been dead last in the FBS in that stat over the last few years.
Sure.
I will continue to double down on total offense is the best way to evaluate.
Okay, cool. Here's a question for you then.
Per play average is one thing, but it's not.
I think I think it's widely agreed upon that it's a better indicator of the total offense. Put it this way. Okay, we'll go great. Here's a great example of it. We're going to use basketball as an example here because it's the same thing. You remember?
By the way, guess what? What does a 3rd and 15 draw play do? Okay, I rest my case. Go.
What?
What does a 3rd and 15 draw play do, Levi?
3rd and 15.
There are fallacies with what your argument is here. What does a 3rd and 15 draw play do?
That's also a fallacy with total offense. If
Absolutely,
that's right.
If you have 10 possessions
and you get 12 yards, yes, that's a failing play.
Correct.
If you have 10 possessions in a game and you score and you put up 200 yards, or you have 20 possessions in a game and you put 400 yards, guess what? Those offenses are equal. Yes, they are. They are objectively equal by every statistical measure. Okay, so anyways, my example here. So if you remember, is it 2021? I think when Virginia won the national title, and when Virginia was like at the height of their power with Tony Bennett and all that. They were known for being a wildly slow basketball team. They scored like 50 points a game, but they won a whole bunch. But if you look at Ken Palm's ratings, they're in the top 5 to top 10 for offensive efficiency because they did not run a lot of possessions. In fact, they purposely slowed the game down to limit possessions. But they were so damn efficient in those limited possessions that they won lots of games. And that's why you would rather see a Virginia team that has really low possession, high efficiency basketball games than something like Chicago State that does nothing but chuck threes. Sure, they have a high volume, they score a lot of points a game, but they also have so many possessions that they give up 110 points a game and it doesn't matter. So the point here is that total offense is kind of a silly metric because you have to factor in the number of possessions. You have to figure in the style of play. You have to factor in a lot of other things. When you don't adjust for the other things going on in the game, you lose the significance of what's going on. Iowa can get 200 yards total in a game, but if they only ran 20 plays, they're averaging 10 yards a play. That's a wildly efficient. That's an all-time efficient offense. That's like 2018 Kyler Murray, Oklahoma level of efficiency. But if they only ran 20 plays or whatever it was, then it doesn't matter.
By the way,
that's how Iowa has always won games, is that they slow the clock down. Iowa is just Virginia basketball, but in the football form.
Let's remember something, though, that moving the chains, utilizing the 4 downs that you've been gifted, and moving the chains is part of football.
Right.
And that may bring that down your yards per play average when Iowa State chucks 2 long balls in 36 seconds and scores.
Sure.
But in
like
Iowa,
you said, there's no perfect stat.
There's no exactly. So I'm just saying.
Right. But yards per play is a better way to evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of an offense than total offense, because you have to adjust for how many possessions and plays you're running.
I am much more of a believer on the side of the passing offense in particular. Like the total yards per game, total passing offense stats are insignificant. It's more about your efficiency, your yards per attempt, completion, your TD to pick ratio.
That's why it's called total
things.
Offense.
That's not what total offense measures, though. Total offense measures how many yards you went forward.
Correct.
So,
staying on the field and moving the chains creates opportunities to gain more yards.
So tell me this. Let's say I have team A and team B. Both of them put up exactly 400 yards in the same game, same amount of points, everything. One ran 40 plays and one ran 20 plays. Which one's the better offense?
Well,
you don't get a divide by the number of plays because you're running total offense.
Well, let's remember that is an unfair comparison.
No, it's not. That's because we don't know flaw in total offense.
Well, I can tell you which team probably controlled time of possession.
Also a bad stat.
Well, it's these stats work collectively as a family.
Sure.
And
time of possession is not as important as it once was, but it's not a completely irrelevant statistic.
It's not irrelevant.
It depends on how you're playing. It depends the style of play.
And we saw last weekend, North Dakota had 12 and a half minutes of possession and cut probably 2 possessions at least off of Iowa State's offense. So it's not like it doesn't matter.
By the way, I never once said that yards per play is irrelevant or bad.
No, but I'm saying if you're looking
saying that a lot of people, offensive people who played the game and coached the game, still look at total offense as a big
Sure,
metric
but
to
what
look
I'm
at.
looking at, like, if you look at, like, if you talk to the minds of today's college football, not 2000 college football, I'm talking about 2024 college football. You're looking at, like, the great offense, like, rest of soul, Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin and Mike Gundy and Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. You look at those guys, they don't look at total offense. They look at yards per play. They look at completion percentages and things like that. They look at rate stats because rate stats project. Total offense can't project. You can't project one way or the other with total offense. You can say we gain 8 yards a play. Well, if we ran 30 plays, if we ran 40 plays in a game, 8 yards per play only gets us to 320 total yards. But if we can speed things up and we can run 50 plays in a game, well, we can do this. And lo and behold, here we are now at the mid 2010s Big 12 offenses that ran lots and lots of tempo because Art Briles figured out that if we can run 90 plays in a game, we can average 7 yards a play instead of 10, and we can be just as productive. And because we think that we've got more offensive firepower than the other team. So we're going to run as many plays as we can. And we're okay with the other team running more plays, but we're going to run more plays because we can outscore them with our more plays. And that's why Iowa does the exact opposite, because for a long time, Kirk Ferentz said, well, we may not have as much offensive talent as Ohio State or Michigan, whoever we're playing. So what we're going to do is we're going to slow the game down. We're going to condense it. We're going to get as few possessions as possible. So that way the margins are razor thin, and we're going to win in those margins. We're going to win on special teams. We're going to win on turnovers. And that's how Kirk Ferentz has made a lot of his career. That's not to say that Iowa has never blown anybody out. That's obviously not the case. But Iowa prefers to get in down and dirty close games and then win in the little stuff. And that's a perfectly fine way to win. But it's a different calculus. It's the same calculus as Baylor in 2014 saying we're going to run 95 plays a game and we're going to score 100 points and we're going to be fine with you scoring 60 because we're going to score 80. It's the same calculus. It's just however you choose to approach it based on your personnel.
Yeah,
and what you just pointed out, math is done on yards per play, not on total offense.
Sure, and what you just pointed out in regards to talent evaluation is if you believe your team to be less talented, obviously the more the talented team gets to play, whether it's a possession in basketball or a snap in football, the more probability that they're going to take over the game. So you want to limit the number of possessions.
That's exactly right. So and Mike Leach actually is kind of the master of this whole thing because his air raid offense was designed to take teams that are less talented and use just raw efficiency to just nickel and dime people out of games. Mike Leach was a pioneer in that thing. And now it's like a staple philosophy of the modern college football offense. So, and all that stuff is done based on rate stats. So that's why, it's not that total offense is we should never look at total offense again. But what I'm saying is if you're looking at how effective an offense is moving the ball, yards per play is a much better barometer of that than total offense, because you can run totally different number of plays in a game. And that changes the number.
There is a strong correlation between total offense and yards per play, because there's not going to be a wildly
there's not. Yeah, you're not going to have
disparity between number of plays run.
Yeah, most teams are going to end up in the 60, in the 50 to 70-ish range a lot of games, whatever. Yeah. But some teams run like I said, 2014 Baylor like to run 80, 90 plays a game, and Iowa's definitely on the bottom end of that, where they prefer to run 45 to 50 plays a game because they can win on those 45 plays. So that's my point here is that when you look at total offense, there's just so much context missing from total offense that you have to do a lot more digging to find out which one's the better offense. And usually that digging leads you to yards per play and yards per attempt and passing and things like that. So it leads you to rate stats. So I think it's more productive to just go straight to the rate stats than look at total offense. Now, total offense in combination with the rate stats, you can look at, okay, if these two teams have the same rate stats, but one's putting up a lot more total offense, then we can make that's not entirely true, Erica, because I just told you that Iowa State's going to win through dinking and dunking the passing game, and they're going to do it by using that to open up the running game, and they've got lots of receivers. If that doesn't tell you that it's using air raid principles, I don't know what to tell you other than that you don't know ball. But that's my point here. It was a long-winded way to.
We love Erica here, Levi. By the way,
well, Erica's been kind of testy with me today. So
she's a big Iowa fan.
That's good. I'm a big Iowa State fan. So
you are.
I just jury's out. Jury's out still. Yeah.
That's why I look forward to these conversations twice a year, especially this one because it's game week. And yes, I will be watching Iowa State, and my eyes are on the nation, but I need to see this game as I typically do. It usually typically wins the broadcast window for me, regardless of how ugly it turns out to be.
And it will
But
be.
I expect a good one. And again, a very important one in regards to the national scale, even though Iowa State's path to a playoff is most likely as a Big 12 champion, and Iowa, from a record standpoint, most likely their path. All right, guys. Appreciate you being here. Levi, wide right, natty light. That's a place to be for Levi's and the rest of the crew there covering Iowa State on SB Nation. Is there anything in particular you want to point people to?
I guess not necessarily. We've got on Spotify, we've got the Wide Right Night Light Podcast Network, where we've got 2-3 podcasts a week. We've got on Wednesday night on YouTube, we're live for the nightcap. It's kind of our version of a late night show. And our new co-host is Dylan Sainer, former Iowa State tight end. And then we've got our website and all that good stuff. And we've got our Discord server as well, which is a good time. Very active. We're at 1,100 members, something like that. And there's lots of good conversation there too, if you're into the Discord thing.
Appreciate you being here, Levi. Enjoy the game.
Thank you for having me.
Corey, 2.5-point favorite at home. I don't know what Vegas is trying to tell us here. That would almost indicate that they think Iowa State's a just slightly better team, which I can't agree with myself.
I'm guessing that number is going to move up. I mean, that I would have to think. Yeah, and I think the Kinnick home field advantage maybe is a little bit more consequential than your average home field. Yeah. So I saw your guy TJ Ronan come out with his top stadiums, and he had Michigan at the top. I thought, I wonder why he did that. I wonder what team he covers.
When you're throwing that out as well, are we just talking about a stadium? We talking about the atmosphere? What are we talking about here? Because I didn't quite get that. It looked like stadium, playing off of what we discussed this offseason. I think Joel Klatt put a list out basically talking about atmosphere. Once you throw the atmosphere into it, I understand the 35,000 people watching UCLA games at the Rose Bowl is not an atmosphere, but if you're just talking about an iconic stadium, that was my response, was the Rose Bowl as a stadium should be on this list.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Corey, thanks for hanging out late. Great breakdown on the Hawkeyes and Iowa State. You were supremely prepped on Iowa State, not that you typically aren't, but I was impressed with the overall breakdown. So thank you for that.
By the way, I would have continued the debate about total offense versus yards per play, but I can't be here till 8. So thank you for having me as always, Erica, for her super chats and whatnot. And we'll see you next week.
All right. Join Corey for post game with Coach Don Patterson, and we'll be back here next Tuesday, everyone.